think we are live on Facebook.
Exciting. Welcome, welcome. Thank you all so much for joining us. Those of you who are joining us live, let us know where you're watching from. It's always great to know. And if you're catching a replay, let us know that this is a replay. I am Molly.
And I'm Asia.
We are the co-founders of the White People Doing Something Facebook group and movement.
Yeah, it's definitely a movement.
Yeah, it's definitely a movement.
Yeah. And we are super excited today to welcome Dr. Tania Israel, author of Beyond Your Bubble. And we are super excited to welcome her and have this conversation because we, if you all are at all paying attention, there's maybe a little bit of like a divide, so to speak, going
Seems
on.
to have, little tiny
in our country. And we know that a lot of you have been wondering, like, how do I bridge that gap, right? Like, how do I have that conversation? For those of you who are wondering, if you're not wondering, that's totally fine. You're going to get a lot out of this conversation today, especially, and you just might take something away. So make sure you're paying attention, turn off other distractions. We're super honored to have this incredible author here with us today. And yeah, Dr. Tania, would you like to introduce yourself and give us a little background?
Absolutely. I am so happy to be here. And I just have to say, I'm so impressed with this group. I'm so impressed, Asia and Molly, with the two of you and the 40-some thousand people, white people who are doing something. It's like, thank you. I'm like, they haven't invited me to the Facebook group of the white people doing nothing. So I'm really like, this is such a better place to be. Anyway, I'm a professor of counseling psychology at UC Santa Barbara. And I wrote a book called Beyond Your Bubble: How to Connect Across the Political Divide, Skills and Strategies for Conversations That Work. It turns out that's a super timely topic. And so I have been doing a lot of, talking with people about it. I've been doing workshops on skills for having dialogue. And so this is just a great opportunity to hear what kinds of questions people have and get to engage with you all about how the work you're doing and how the work I'm doing might intersect.
Yeah, I love it. So we were talking, so we've got people tuning in from as far away as Jerusalem, Canada, New Hampshire, Baltimore, Tucson, Indianapolis, all kinds of places. So very exciting. So we were talking earlier about how when this group started, we had this vision of maybe even 1,000 people will be in this group. And that would be so great, because if there is an action such as signing a petition or making phone calls, it would be really nice to just have a group and have people who are ready to take it on, whatever it is. About 12 hours into creating this group, we realized really hit us in the face that this divide, what's missing is connection with each other. And what we tend to do is go, yeah, that is what's missing. Mm-hmm. Really too bad what this country has come to. You not only acknowledge that, but actually give us sort of skills and strategies. So I would just love to start from like you said, as it turns out, it's a timely topic, but what had you interested in this to begin with?
Yeah, that's a great question. We'll have to go back to the 1990s for this.
I was there.
All right. Who remembers the 1990s?
Yeah.
So back then, I'll say, first of all, I'm also from Charlottesville, Virginia. And a lot of people know about Charlottesville these days because of all the conflict that happened there recently. And one of the things that I think has been really special for me about coming from Charlottesville is I think it's actually helped me to be much better at reaching across the divide, because Charlottesville is a college town that's in the middle of rural Virginia. And so there's people who have different kinds of views and different perspectives and different experiences and different values, but there's one public high school. So everyone's there together. So I feel like I really got connected to and exposed to people across difference. And they were just, the other people in my classes. And not everybody has that opportunity to grow up in a place where they have a lot of connection across the divide. So I just want to say, like, thank you, Charlottesville, for that. So in the 90s, actually in Charlottesville, I started a group to bring together pro-choice and pro-life people to have dialogue with each other.
Wow.
Yeah. And I was just tired of being angry at the other side. And I wanted to try something different. And so we had this group. We would like meet in the library and we would come together. And the thing that I really learned from that was that there was so much more to people than what you can fit on a bumper sticker, you know?
Yes.
Yeah.
Or a Facebook status.
Right. Or a
Yes.
hat. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it was amazing to get to hear more about people's stories, about how they came to their views, not just what their opinions were and elaborating on that, but actually, how did you get there? And what I realized was I had been evaluating their conclusions through the lens of my own experiences and values. And, you know, of course, that doesn't make any sense. But if I actually heard how they got there, it made total sense.
Yes.
And it didn't change anything about how I felt about women's reproductive rights, but it changed everything about how I felt about people who disagree with me on it.
Oh, wow. Okay. Okay.
We hope you all are paying attention.
So those of you who are not in the 90s, can you just contextualize the 90s and the pro-life, pro-choice? Can you just contextualize what was happening then? I'm thinking about Birmingham and, you know, things like that.
Yeah, there was a lot happening in terms of violence against abortion providers. I mean, it was a real battleground. And actually, I was working in a clinic that performed abortions after college, and we were like front lines. And so, you know, going into work, I would be walking by the protesters, and we had security and, you know, all the bulletproof glass and all of that stuff.
Yeah.
And it was scary and it was maddening because there were these women who I was like, I'm trying to help these women. And I felt like the people on the other side are just, you know, not doing that. And they're really interfering with what these women are trying to do. And I will also tell you, the other thing I realized is most people who are pro-life were not the protesters. They were not the people out in front of the clinic. And that's actually something like, let me like bring it into the current context and some of the work that I've been doing and what I've been learning. Most people are not extremists.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
And it's a huge misperception that we have.
Yeah.
And when we're perceiving other people as extremists, like, we're not going to want to talk to them.
Right.
Yeah. And there's a whole lot of research about why we have those misperceptions. I mean, some of it's because of what we're seeing in the media. Like, obviously journalists would much rather cover like people who have strong opinions and are speaking out. And, you know, that's much more interesting than people who are like, yeah, I can kind of see things either way. Like, that just doesn't make good TV, apparently.
Right.
So it's what we're seeing, but it also turns out we just have like psychological predispositions to viewing people in certain ways as more extreme than they actually are. So I provided a link, maybe that can go up in the chat or something, about an article I just published on Medium that if you're like, I want to know more about that, like take a look at that because I think just knowing that we have misperceptions is the first step in developing that curiosity then about like, well, then who are people really if they're not who I think they are?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And we've been reading a lot of Valerie Kaur's work as well, right? And the revolutionary love and approaching people with wonder. Mm-hmm. And it's, you know, what I'm loving is sort of this groundswell of, hey, most people aren't extremists. You can have conversations with people you don't agree with. Like it feels like it's coming.
Well, we're putting it out there. There's definitely more of these, I think, conversations now, maybe than there's ever been. And it's also like out of necessity, I think, for sure. I mean, it's like, we're like, I don't know about you, but like, I'm right there with you, right? Like, I'm tired of this. Like, we made a declaration in our group, like, we're ending, you know, creating a world where racism cannot exist in our lifetime. Because I'm tired of it, you know, like, aren't we just tired of it? Like, it's ridiculous. Like, it's like the same soap opera over and over and over again. And like, come on, like, this is like boring at the like very least, you know?
Absolutely. Oh, I know. It's
Yeah.
like, can't we move on to something else? Because just kind
Yeah.
of done with racism now. Can we
Yeah.
get past it? But here's the thing, like we can feel that really strongly, but and this is, I think, why you started the group and why people are in this group. It's not enough to just want it.
Right.
And so then it's like, what do you do about it? So this is where my training as a counseling psychologist comes in, because
Okay.
my thing is like, what do we do about it? Like, how can we fix it? Like, most of my research is actually on LGBT issues, and it's all about interventions. It's all about what do we do to make things better for LGBT people? So I don't just want to know about what's wrong. I want to know about how to fix it. And I want to know about the research on how to fix it. So after the 2016 election, it was really clear that we were having some problems connecting across the divide. And that, frankly, the election outcome caught a lot of people off guard, myself included. And I was like, okay, I'm missing something. There's something going on in this country that I'm not understanding. So I started by creating, so I'm all about resources. I'm like, what can I make that will help people? So I started by creating something that I call the flowchart that will resolve all political conflict in our country.
Perfect. There you go.
I know. I was like, this is all we need.
This is it. Fixed. Done. Thank you. Please share this with us. What is this?
Spoiler alert, it has not yet resolved all political conflict in our country. But I've decided that's just a distribution issue. So I want everyone to download that from my website and then get it out to everybody. And then we're going to be fine then. Because part of the thing with that flowchart was about being intentional about these conversations.
Yes.
Like the first question is, do you even want to have this conversation? And, if you don't, move along, this flowchart is not for you. Find a Venn diagram somewhere that works for you. But if you do want to have these conversations, then do it skillfully and do it intentionally. And so I laid out things. I laid out okay, here's how to listen. Here's how to manage your emotions. Here's how to, if you want to actually understand someone's perspective, here's some information about where they might be coming from. Here's some tips on finding common ground. So these are the things. And so since the flowchart wasn't enough, I was like, oh, maybe people need more help developing those skills. So then I made a workshop. And so it's a 2-hour skills building workshop. And I offered it to hundreds of people. And they were like, yes, this is great. We want more resources. And I was like, really? Still more? That wasn't enough? Because I can't do the workshop for everybody, it turns out. So then I wrote a book. So that's how the book came out.
That's amazing. Yeah. And so who comes to these workshops?
So many different kinds of people do. I mean, people from different perspectives on, in terms of politics, but I've done them for political organizations. I've done them for elected officials. I've done them for faith communities, which I think is actually one of the ideal places to do it.
Yes.
I've done it just in the community where anybody who wants to can come. I've done it in corporate environments. I've done this in a lot of different places. And actually, it's actually more readily available now because I just created an online version of this workshop. Okay. And I'll just do a little plug right now because on Sunday, I'm doing one that's open for people to register for. So you don't have to be associated with an organization. So Sunday, March 14th. Okay. And there's a link to that, I think, that will be shared so that you can go to that and register for it. It's $20, but if anyone's having trouble with the registration fee, let me know. And, we'll try to make accommodations because I want this to be available to as many people as can make use of it.
Great. Yeah. And what time is that? I'm just putting in my
It's at 4 p.m. Eastern time, 1 p.m. Pacific time, and
got it. Very
adjustments in between.
Yeah, exactly. Figure it out if you're
if you're in Jerusalem, you're on your own to figure out.
Right? Yeah, exactly.
So, in your flow chart, you mentioned, one, do you even have want to have the conversation, right? And in terms of the steps, and then I forget if it was the second or third, right? About managing your own emotional state, right? And can you just talk a little bit more about doing that? Because for me, I find that to be the most difficult part, right? As managing my own emotional state, because it's we feel so passionately about our view, right? And like how we think things should be. And then that what that does, what I find is that I'm I just like, well, I just find it like welling up, you know? I'm like, but you are like, ugh, you know, and that's like the thing that I work on for me. That's like the thing that I have to like be most conscious of in any of these conversations.
Totally, totally. So I want to talk about managing emotions, but I want to first kind of distinguish it from tone policing, because I feel like when I start talking about managing emotions, people are like, tone policing, like why do I have to keep a lid on it? I have every right to be angry. When you look at what's going on, you know, in the world, and you look at racism, like who wouldn't be angry? Who wouldn't be like losing their mind over this?
Yeah.
So I totally get that. The thing that I always do is I think about, all right, what's my goal? And I always ask people that. Why are you interested in having dialogue? And the main goals that people talk to me about are, there's someone in my life who I want to maintain a good relationship with, or I want to persuade people to see things a different way, or I want to find common ground, or I simply cannot fathom how people can think or act or vote as they do. So I'm like, great. It's good to know what your goals are, and then to think about, how do you reach those goals? So if people said my main goal is to like express my views openly and like with no holds barred, and I don't care about any of the rest of that stuff, I would be like, great, do that, like vent all you want. But I want to help people to reach their goals. So what I do is I say, look, if what you need most right now is to express your views, if you need to vent, if you need to feel validated, maybe don't go talk to somebody who disagrees with you. Like find your people and get your support there, so that when you want to have a different kind of conversation that can reach a different kind of goal, then you're going to be more able to do that. So that's the first thing, is sort of make sure you've got that support somewhere else. Another thing that I'll say is, I think that there's also a difference sometimes between people who are being targeted by a certain thing and people who are trying to be allies. So I'm going to go with white people doing something. We're talking primarily to allies, like people who want to serve as allies to people of color. Is that pretty accurate?
For the most part, it is a diverse group. I mean, obviously, it's not only white people in the group.
Yeah.
But very much by design. But
I'm going to speak a little differently to people of color versus white people when we're talking about racism, because I think, like, when you are in the target group, then it's a little different. The kind of position you're in when you're hearing people share their views about something, about you and who you are. So let me say, what I'm going to say now really applies to people who are like, I want to be an ally. So let me talk about how you can be an ally. And this is really important, because you as an ally are probably really outraged also. Like, you're outraged about racism. It affects you in different ways, but you're really upset about it. And if what you want most to do is to help people of color, then for me, the best way, like, I'm a person of color, the best way you can support me is to actually be able to reach out to other white people. And in order to do that, you might need to manage your emotions and not blow up at them so that you can reach them. And it's hard to do. Like, I want to acknowledge it's hard to do. Of course, this stuff is upsetting. But I know, like, after George Floyd's murder, there were, all of these white people I saw on Facebook, my Facebook friends, who were kind of saying, oh, I am unfriending all of my racist family members. And I was like, no, don't do that. Like, if you're not talking to them, who can? Like, you're the people who can do this. Like, white people, we need you. Like, we need you to be allies. And so that's going to mean figuring out about managing emotions. And frankly, people of color already know how to manage emotions, because we've got to be out there in a racist world, and we've had to learn how to do that. So this is a great skill for everybody to learn. But if you haven't had to learn it yet in your life, here's an opportunity for you to do that. And so, in terms of, let me pause there. I'll go on and talk about how to do that in a minute. But is there anything else I should hit on that before
No,
I
I
do
think
that?
that's great. And it's a really important thing. And it's something, we went live on January 6th as the Capitol, had people running around. And we just reminded everyone, like, we all know someone there. We all know someone there. And yes, these are the extremists, and no, they're, the majority of people aren't. And, it's interesting that you're from Charlottesville, because one of the things that we talked about as well is that it has to be easier to engage in a conversation with us than it does to go to Walmart and buy a $3 tiki torch and stand in that group of people. And so when we're like, you're wrong, you're a terrible person, how can you think that? And I'm unfriending, it's like, we just lost that opportunity completely.
Yes.
We just lost that opportunity.
Absolutely.
And
that's a great way to think about it.
Yeah. And it just has to be easier.
Yeah.
It has to be less response effort to engage in a conversation with us.
Yeah. It's so nice to sort of get into a group and everybody can like rage about how bad racism is and all of that. And everyone's supporting each other. Okay. Like that's the easier part. The much harder part is talking to somebody who's not already on board with that.
Yes.
Yes. And that is like what has to happen. Right? Because otherwise, what are we doing? We're just like, we stay in our echo chambers, and we just like, it feels real good, and like, oh, like we're surrounded by people who agree that we're like, it's all wrong, like you were saying, and then nothing changes.
Yep.
Right? Nothing changes. And that's one of the things, like, why this group and why we bring on different guests like yourself to this group, because like we believe that proximity is key. Like Molly and I are not connected to the same white people out there that you all are out there. And, when you have one less racist in your life by cutting them off and cutting them out of your life, that doesn't mean one less racist in our lives, So, so thank you for
absolutely. And, one of the things that I always think about when I'm training people about like doing social justice work, when you're doing social justice work, when you're an ally, then it's so hard sometimes to tolerate people who aren't, because you get it. You like see something that they don't see. But the thing I always point out is like the minute before you saw it, you didn't see it either.
Yes.
Like we've all been there.
Yeah.
And we've all been at a place where we didn't get it. And sometimes it's so horrifying to us to remember that and to think that we were there, that we just can't tolerate being with anybody else who's there. So I gotta say, like everybody's been there. Everybody's been like the moment before they got it.
Yeah.
And so you have to forgive yourself a little bit for that, so that you can then be open to talking to other people who aren't there yet. And you weren't either at one point.
So full disclosure, you may hear Tania saying a lot of the same things that you hear us saying. We met today. So I'm just saying this it's so fascinating. Yeah, it's really exciting. And it's such a good point. And you talked about it earlier, right? Like you're literally watching people have this experience, but through your lens of what you've experienced in life, with no regard whatsoever for their lens and what they've experienced in life. And we don't know what we don't know.
Right. And hopefully that can make us want to know, that.
Yeah.
And so curiosity is key. All right. So then let me get into what happens if you're curious and then you hear stuff that makes you go, whoa, I can't hear this. This is terrible what I'm hearing.
Yes. Get into that. Yes.
So a couple things about it. Like one thing to keep in mind is sometimes things mean a different thing to other people than they mean to you. So if someone says all lives matter, you go, what? Like, no, that's not the way we think about things. Like, cause if you're in Black Lives Matter circles, that means like not Black Lives Matter,
Yeah, that means racist. You're white supremacist. Yeah, totally. That's what that means. Yeah.
But that's not necessarily what it means to that person. They're not necessarily in this circle where it's got that meaning. So one of the first things to do is like when you hear something, get curious about what that means for somebody else and ask them like, oh, I'm curious about what you mean when you say that. And try not to be like, what do you mean?
What are you talking about? How could you think that? Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the first thing is don't make assumptions about the meaning that things have for people. And sometimes that alone can help to shift it. Another thing to keep in mind is that what I think of as our operating systems, like our physiological operating systems, were developed at a much earlier time in history, like when probably the kinds of threats that we were encountering were saber-toothed tiger kinds of threats.
We
Yes,
just talked about this today.
Yeah. So,
Yeah,
and you know,
exactly.
if you like have a saber-toothed tiger in front of you, you're gonna want to like that whole fight, flight, or freeze response comes up, you
Yeah.
know, because
Yeah.
you got to you got to kill the tiger or you got to get out of there. And so you notice your like heart's beating faster and your face is getting flushed and your muscles are tensing and all of this. So that's how our bodies respond to threat.
Yes.
That's how our bodies were built to respond to threat.
Yes.
But the threat that you might be experiencing now is somebody like in front of you who is either yelling or even just disagreeing with you in an elevated tone. And that can feel like a threat. And your body is going to respond exactly the same way that it would if that's a saber-toothed tiger.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
so the good thing to know about that is that there's something you can do about it. So the first thing is notice that it's happening and try to like catch that early on. The best thing that you can do, the best tool that I can offer is breathing. And the great news is that we are all doing that all the time, right? But we're not always breathing in a way that's going to actually help us to regain our equilibrium. So you want to think about slow, deep breathing. And I always think about it as the kind of breathing you do. Wait, do I have? Yeah, I'm going to do this right here. I wasn't planning to, so I got to get a little equipment out. If you had a little thing of bubbles and you are going to blow bubbles. So the type of breathing you want to do is this.
If you do not have bubbles on your desk, okay, this is a lesson.
Keep some bubbles right there.
Keep some bubbles. Keep them on your
Exactly.
desk. Yeah.
So, but you can see it's slow and it's deep and it's calming. So start with that. Start with breathing. Also remember your motivations. You might be like, I love my Aunt Harriet. I love my Aunt Harriet. Like just remembering like what you're trying to do there.
Yeah.
Those are just some good tools for actually like managing those emotions that come up.
Yeah. Oh, I love the bubbles.
So good. Yeah. Yeah.
I love the bubbles.
So good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. So so you hear something you disagree with. And I think one of the things I was thinking about too, just as you were talking, is that some of what we learn, it's like you can't unlearn it. You can't unsee it. And it makes it that much harder to imagine that even you didn't know that. And I think you also point to when somebody says, well, I think all lives matter. And the immediate response is, you're wrong, you're racist. If you think all lives matter, get out of here. Right? And that was really what this group was about, is that if you think all lives matter, great, let's talk about it. What does that mean? What do you mean by all lives? Sometimes you're one or two questions away from realizing that you actually agree.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's true. Like most of the time, somebody's much closer to your views than you imagine them to be.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
But they just think all lives matter, obviously, including Black lives. Like, what are you talking about? You know?
Yeah. And I think, because we talked about this a little bit, like the context is decisive, right? Like I think a lot of times people don't understand, like you were saying, like the context in which they're saying what they're saying, you know, and like why for me it has a totally different meaning and context than it does for you or like for anybody, and like why it's upsetting. And so do you have any kind of like thoughts or strategies or tools for helping people to kind of bridge that context? I mean, besides questions.
Yeah.
But
So let me talk about it from two angles. Like one angle is, you know, you do want to understand where somebody's coming from. And so the first thing you're going to need to do that is you're actually going to need to listen to them. And shockingly,
Oh,
Wait a minute.
okay, never mind.
Wait a minute. You mean to tell me that to understand where someone's coming from, you have to do this thing called listening?
I know I'm blowing your mind.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's a type of listening that really helps. So you've got to give somebody uninterrupted time to speak, first of all. Oh, and I'm going to blow your mind again, because here's a little trick that I learned. It took me 20 years of being a psychologist to find this out. If you rearrange the letters of the word listen, it spells silent.
You just figured that out?
No.
Oh.
I didn't figure that out myself. Someone had to tell me that. But
Now we know it. Now I can't unsee
I'm not
it.
keeping it a secret. I want everybody to know that.
Yeah, that's
Yeah. Okay,
yeah,
so
it's like desserts and stressed.
you can't actually listen if you're talking.
Mhm.
So that's the first thing. You've got to give someone uninterrupted time to speak. And then while they're speaking, you know how when somebody's talking in your head, you're like, oh, this is what I'm going to say back. This is how I'm going to argue that point. No. And all that stuff's going on in your head. Instead of doing that, try to take in what they're saying so that when you speak, instead of like spewing out all of your views, you summarize what they just said. Just a little summary of something that was meaningful in what they've said. And that does a couple things, sort of reflecting that back to them. Well, first of all, make sure that you understood it. Like you'll say something and they'll be like, oh, no, that's not quite it. They can correct it.
Mhm.
It'll make you pay attention, and it'll also help them to feel like you understand them and that you care what they have to say. And that's like, if they don't think you care what they have to say, why are they even going to be in this conversation with you?
Right.
So good.
Right. And there's an opportunity to influence. You know, a lot of times what we talk about is, I think when we go into conversations, we go in with like this intention to like cause them to change their mind and like be right and make our point. Right. And that's how we go into the conversation. And what happens is like, you know, you try and do that. Like, you ever have anybody? It's like a freight train coming straight at you and being like, "Let me tell you, like, why you are so wrong and I am so right." You know, and really, the key, and it sounds like you're right on track with this, is like, no, you just like the first thing you got to do is listen in a way that indicates to the other person that you actually care, and like actually care, right? Like if you actually care. And you're more interested in being in their world as opposed to being right about your point, then you have an opportunity then to maybe influence, then to maybe start to shift their mindset and what they're thinking. But until then, it's like, oh no, it's like, here's this train and here's my wall. And it's like, okay, we'll see what happens.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, think about if somebody's coming at you and like, are they going to change your mind by just telling you what they think? No, like they're going to have to want to care about you in order to potentially shift things. So yeah, that's absolutely it. And that sort of, there's like a self-righteousness that's behind that sort of approach that we have, that we think, oh, if they just heard this thing, then they would see how completely right I am and how completely wrong they are.
Yeah.
So that's also something like when we do like sharing, like summarizing back to them what they said is important. But there's also this other important thing about, okay, when it gets to the point, we understand them, we've heard them, we're managing our emotions, all of that stuff. What are we going to share with them about our perspective? And so the first thing I'll tell you, and this is really sad because I'm a researcher, like statistics and research, that's not going to change their mind.
No, but we want it to, right? And we think it's going to, because we're like, but look at all the facts. See, here's my bowl of facts. Like, you can't deny this bowl of facts. So, like, it's facts. Like, you just need to eat facts all day, and like, it's going to change you, you know?
Yeah.
Shredded facts.
and I know a lot of you out there are like, yeah, I believe in science. And I'm like, yeah, here's the funny thing. Science all points to not sharing facts.
That is a funny thing.
Yeah.
It's so
Yeah.
ironic. Like the science
Yeah.
says, don't talk about the science.
Yeah, science doesn't
Yeah.
talk about science. It's not going to change your mind either, even if you believe in science, facts. Because honestly, I talk about this, like all of the stuff I'm talking about has such a strong evidence base to it. All the stuff about having dialogue.
Yeah.
It doesn't make people who believe in science want to have dialogue. That's
No.
not what does it. Yeah.
No.
So it's fine. I get that. So not sharing stats, not sharing slogans, like often within our circles, we're talking like in shorthand and in slogans, and that all makes sense within our context. But again, that has very different meanings outside. So the thing that I always encourage people to do is share your story. And you've got to be willing to kind of come out from behind stats and slogans and things that seem objective and actually like share where you're coming from. Like, how did you come to your views? Not just what are your opinions, but how did you get there? What's your journey? What affected you? Maybe you've changed your view on it. And what was that like? So if there was a point where you started to like wake up and recognize things, what was that? And how did that happen? So that can be really, really so much easier for someone to hear than all the stats and slogans.
Well, definitely. And they hear that I was where you are. That I also thought all lives matter the first time I saw Black Lives Matter. That I also thought, whatever it is. And even if you didn't, at least as you're saying, getting curious about them, you may find, again, you go back far enough. We have a dear friend who is from the South, whose father doesn't much care for Colin Kaepernick because he started racism. So you can absolutely, point to some historical figures like Martin Luther King. You can, talk about some wars that there's a lot that you can talk about. And there's a lot of facts. Or you can just get really curious about that. And you can see that what's troubling is the divide, and he feels like he can't even have a conversation with his own kids anymore because everyone's on opposite sides of the equation.
Yeah.
And you have to get that if you grow up thinking the world is one way and you discover the world is completely different than what you grew up thinking, that's really jarring.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. It's really hard for people to shift. I mean, and that's why there's some generational differences around this. People are having a lot of trouble talking to their parents, talking to their kids, talking to their grandparents. And there's also some regional differences around this.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And there's some different kinds of values and experiences and different places that people live sort of created by that. But it's so important to want to know more about those other views and perspectives. I mean, I know we've got like an international audience here, but even if we're just talking about in the US, I'm really curious about the people who have a very different view from me, who are in this country, because we've somehow got to have a government that can like encompass all of us. And how do we do that? And how do we work toward that if we don't even want to know about all the other people?
Yeah.
And to me, like, what's really fascinating about this whole conversation, right? And like the idea of not wanting to know, it's like, what is that, right? So like, I'm like real curious about that. Like, what is this not wanting to know, right? Yeah. And like this pushing away, because I think like deep down, what we're really talking about here is being super connected and like actually connected to each other, and to everybody. And that's what we really want, right? We really want, but like it shows up in really weird ways because we feel like we have to protect ourselves, right? Like we feel like, oh, for me to be close, for me to be vulnerable, for me to be actually connected, like that's dangerous in some way, shape, or form. So like I want to push you away. And like, as I'm saying this, I think about like how this shows up in our everyday lives, right? Not even about like politics or racism, right? Like, but in our own relationships, we put up these walls and it's like, I don't want to look at it. We're fake with each other. We're fake in how we interact with people. We're fake. And like the internet has provided this like great screen of like ability to allow people to like perseverate, so to speak, on their own fakeness and like proliferate it, which only serves as a way to like further distance us from each other, from the truth of who we are, and like letting people see you, right? And see who we are. And I'm so curious about like where we get that from and why we allow that to continue to be the driving factor in our lives. Like so much of our life is made up of like, let me put up this facade to further distance myself from you when all I really want is just to be with you.
Oh, it's heartbreaking, really.
It's heartbreaking.
Yeah. Yeah, because we want to connect so badly, and there's so many barriers there. And I'm so curious about that also. And when people tell me what goes on for them around this and what keeps them from actually having these conversations, some of it is our imagination about who we're having that conversation with, and then our imagination about how we think that conversation is going to be. And some of that does come from media, but I'm so glad you brought up social media, because I think that just exacerbates it too, because we actually, one, feel like we're engaging with people, because we're commenting on their Facebook posts or we're like tweeting back and forth at them. But not only is that not going to bring us closer together and help us to understand each other better, there's actually research that shows that can push people farther apart. So if you think that you're going to change somebody's mind by disagreeing with them on social media, you actually are having a better chance that you're going to make them feel more firmly grounded in what they already believe. So don't do that. I mean, I always say these conversations need to take place. Yeah, it needs to take place face to face, not Facebook to Facebook. Like that's not actual dialogue. People also tell me other things. Some people say, well, I'm kind of worried that if I listen, it might, like, what if I change my mind? Like, what if, and that's terrifying. Like, what if I hear something that challenges me and makes me go, oh, I hadn't thought about things that way. And that's scary. And so one of the bodies of literature that I came across when I was writing this book is about intellectual humility. So intellectual humility says you can have strong and even more extreme views on something, deeply held views, but still be curious about, interested in, and respectful of a different perspective. That's possible. And I feel like people are so worried that if they open themselves up to hearing another view, they're going to have to change. And it turns out you can actually go into this with this kind of intellectual humility where you can hang on to your values and you can want to know about somebody else's. And so that's okay too. Like, you don't have to change, but it might change you some, because if you like I said, I didn't change my ideas about reproductive rights, but I changed my ideas about people who disagree with me on it. So some of our views we're worried about are not our views about the issue. It's that we have such strong views about people who disagree with us.
Yeah.
And that's sometimes what we're worried about. Like, what if I have to re-envision that person? Maybe they're not a racist. Well, what does that mean if they're not a racist? Or what does it mean if I am too? What does it mean if we all are, in fact? So this kind of shakes our ground of how we understand things. And I think that's hard for people.
Well, and it's such a great point. You're saying, like, what if I change? What if I change? And yet we're going in wanting to change them, with this total resistance to the even the small possibility that they might change or influence us or give us a more nuanced look.
Yeah.
And we're going in asking them to change. And one of the things that we've talked about before is that, we may have some friends who we just think they're so far gone. We can tell they're so far gone. They're so far on the other side. You can tell by what they post. And we remind people all the time, they think the exact same thing of you. They think the exact same thing of you.
Yeah, absolutely. I love your point about the more nuanced view, because I think that's something that we underestimate the power of that, and the power of gaining a more nuanced view and more nuanced understanding. So that's beautiful.
Yeah.
I know we have some questions.
Yeah, we do. And that's
great.
Just so everybody knows, that's why I keep looking over here. I'm not like, this is boring, anything. Very clear. So Carla asks to please speak to the underlying element of fear. Fears caused by misbeliefs, false stories, narratives, negative impact on self-security.
Yeah, there's a lot of fear in having these conversations. And I think sometimes it's, people say sometimes it feels like an existential threat, these conversations, because it is about our values and our views, and sometimes our identities and our experiences. And I guess that the only thing that I can say about that is we do need to make sure we're going to get our support elsewhere for, we're not necessarily going to get the support from the people who disagree with us, but you do need support, especially if the conversation you have is about an issue that particularly affects your life, or that, it's shaking up your values. The other thing I'll say is if you have a trauma history, that thing that I was saying about how your body's responding to threat, it's going to be a little harder to regain your equilibrium then. And so you've got to take all of that into account and recognize, like, where do I need like extra support? Like, I'm going to go like get a therapist and help me like work through stuff because I can feel stuff coming up for me that's particularly hard. And where can I use like Tania's bubble blowing thing? And like, where can I just go get support from someone else? But recognize sort of like what kind of support you need so that then you can, we talk about vulnerability sometimes, but also bravery in this. And so sometimes it's about like, okay, this is going to be hard and it feels scary, and I'm going to try it anyway. Yeah. And the only way that it gets less scary is by doing it. But maybe start in lower stakes situations and practice these things. And, before you move into the things you feel like are going to be the most charged.
Great. So a couple of, one person says, my only concern are the people I've set boundaries with. What do I do if I don't want them back in my life?
Okay. Like you get to choose. Like, you don't have to. Being able to have dialogue provides an opportunity. It's not a mandate. Right. So you never have to do it.
Right.
But I want to give a little bit of a flip side, because I see sometimes too many people sort of saying, I am not going to have a conversation with that person, sort of like I'm cutting people out. Partially, and they haven't actually looked at their assumptions. They haven't actually tried to find out what the meanings are for somebody. So I would say you never have to have one of these conversations, and there may be some benefit to doing it. So know both of those things.
Such a good point. There may be some benefit to doing it, right? And oftentimes those boundaries that we have in place, a conversation can make a difference. And we realize that the boundaries that we put up to protect ourselves can sometimes actually
keep us encaged.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think sometimes, the piece that I was talking about before where, people on Facebook are saying, I'm unfriending all of my racist relatives. One of the things that I realized is because social media is kind of this public forum, people are trying to express solidarity through that, and so that's part of what's trying to be communicated. It's really hard to be in that kind of public forum and express solidarity with people who are being targeted, and willingness and openness to have conversations across the divide. So that's where we need to have these connections outside of that kind of forum to do it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Yeah. So we talk about creating a world where racism cannot exist. And Rebecca asks, how can we create a world where racism cannot exist without an agenda for change?
Oh, but dialogue is an agenda for change. That's the thing. And actually dialogue connection, I think if there's anything that's going to make racism impossible, it's if everybody's really connected to each other.
Yep.
There you
go, friends. There you go.
That's it. Okay. All right. We're done.
We're done. We're done. done here. That was today's lesson. That was your diploma. We're done here. That's just it. Creating a world where racism cannot exist requires connection. That's why we talk about one conversation at a time. And this is your reminder, if you are somebody who has cut people off, who has unfriended everyone, remember to have compassion for yourself and not make yourself wrong for doing those things, but really get and acknowledge the impact that that's had. Yeah. And can you even imagine being one of those people who's cut off and someone reaches out to you and they're like, I realized that I took what you said at face value and I didn't really ask you anything about that, and I just cut you off.
Yeah. And I think that those conversations are happening now. There's a nice piece on Rebellious Magazine, which is online, that I talked to the journalist about, and she was writing about this whole thing about I unfriended family members, and now I'm like, gosh, I'm rethinking it. And so if you can always reach back out. I talk about how to invite somebody into these conversations. And sometimes what you want to do is just acknowledge, like, gosh, I know that the last time we tried to do this, it was really rocky, or I know I unfriended you and I want to reach out and I want to have a different kind of conversation. And I really want to hear more about your perspective and where you're coming from. Yes. What a lovely thing to do, and what bravery it takes to do that, and what potential payoff it can have.
Yes.
Those of you who are in our 5-day social transformation challenge, this may sound familiar. Those of you who are in the 6-week program, Exponential Human Project, this may sound familiar. We're not going to get there alone, friends.
No, absolutely. And I think like it's so powerful, like this idea of acknowledging. We talk about this a lot, like acknowledging where you made a mistake, because we think in our mind, or not even if it's a mistake, but it's like where it doesn't work, right? Like we think in our minds that like that's going to somehow like diminish our power, right? It's going to diminish who we are by admitting that how we have been or how we behave like didn't work. But it's actually the opposite.
It's so the opposite.
It's the opposite. You get more power when you're like, I can admit, like, oh, this didn't work.
I can acknowledge it.
Right.
And acknowledge the
wasn't
impact.
my intention. Yeah.
And people are often thinking about power in terms of winning the argument.
Yes.
But think about, what if you're winning the relationship with that person? Like that's the win, is having that connection.
Yes. And see, I love that. I love that, right? Because it changes the context of the conversation, right? That's how you shift the paradigm, because we always think about like, oh, I got to win or lose in that context, right? Like it's a win or lose a conversation. I'm right, you're wrong. That's it. And we're only thinking in that context. And if you're coming from there, I call it like the come from, then you're going to there's always a winner and there's always a loser, right? But when you shift the context to, oh, we're going to actually be able to like connect and have a relationship. And maybe the relationship isn't like as glorious as like I imagined, but now there's a connection. This is a game where no one loses. Yeah. And imagine that, right? Imagine a world where no one loses. Like shift that paradigm, like make that context. And if we can start practicing that in our relationships,
I
can't get any closer, right? Getting on it, but it's powerful, right? Like if we can create that world through our relationships with one another, then what else is possible, right? And what gets to disappear inside of that?
Yes. What if this is all a cooperative game?
Yes. Where no one loses and everybody wins.
Yeah.
I'm here for that game.
Yeah.
That sounds way more fun.
I know.
Right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Let's just play that game.
Oh, so good. Yeah. We're playing that game.
Yeah.
That is this game.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Everybody can be on my team and no one gets picked last.
Yeah, we do a whole thing in our social challenge where we talk about being picked last and how it feels. And and it's interesting because I think about, Asia and I were radical in our college days. And it was like, oh, I had a really good conversation. I totally changed that guy's mind. It's like, one, no, you didn't. Two, what about that makes it a really good conversation? You know, it's like I had a really good conversation. Like I really heard and got where they were coming from.
Yeah.
What if that's the really good conversation?
Mm,
No.
I
It's
love it.
interesting. I've always thought, and I'm not planning to run for public office, but I've always thought that if I ran for public office, I wouldn't want to talk to the people who agreed with me. I would want to have a conversation with the people who disagreed.
Yeah. Yeah,
Because I just think we
absolutely.
learn so much.
It's so interesting. I mean, it's the thing I love about like canvassing, for issues or candidates, like going and knocking on strangers' doors and having an excuse to hear what they think. Like,
Yeah.
how often do we actually just get to ask somebody like, "Hey, what do you think about this issue?" and really get to hear? And I'm like, "Oh wow, I didn't realize that there was somebody in my community behind that door who had an experience that I hadn't taken into consideration or I didn't know about."
Yes.
So yeah.
Yeah. Oh, it's so great. Oh, it's so great. All right. Well, looks like people are enjoying this, which is no surprise. And I'm so, so glad since I appreciate this so much. Yeah. If you're just joining us, we have a few people who have been joining us towards the end. Like, go back, rewind, like, watch it again, catch a replay for sure. I mean, this is just. Oh, there's so much goodness and it's so exciting and gives me ideas for things.
Yeah, I mean, like, I
Yeah.
think about like creating and playing games where everybody wins, right? And like doing this through dialogue, right? And doing this through like, and what that leads to is connection. And what I'm always so fascinated by is going back to connection because, like, I think at the end of the day,
All we want.
it's an access to like who we truly are, which we're just like we just want to love each other. Like that's always all we want to do. Like really, if we
Love and
like
be loved.
get down to like the rawness of it, but we put so much in front of that, right? We put so much on top of that because somewhere along the way we believed the lie that said love wasn't enough, or like we can't be loved, or we shouldn't be loved, or like we shouldn't be loved, you know? So it's just fascinating.
I love cooperative games and I love taking competitive games and making them cooperative. You know, the game Block Us where you have to put down like the little plastic shapes and
Yeah.
you've got to try to block other people so they can't put down their shapes. I changed that game. I made it a cooperative game. And it's like, let's see how many little plastic things we can all put down together, and how few there are left at the end.
Yeah.
And that's what we're trying to do. And that's pretty much what I'm trying to do here too. It's like, okay, there's this competitive game that we're playing, which is called like how to argue against the other side. Let's change that to a cooperative game.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, so
How can we
amazing.
all win?
So incredible. Wow. Well, when Suze told us that she reached out to you and that you said yes,
We're like, "Oh
we
my
were so
God!"
excited. And then she read the entire book and wrote us this beautiful summary. And we like read it out loud to each other, like, and then this, and then that. Did you see this and that? And we're so excited to read the book. You can buy the book, of course. We always remind you to please buy it from your independent bookstore. There's lots of good places to buy it.
If you go to my website,
Where
TaniaIsrael.com, and you look for the book, one of the places I have listed there, that this is a place I love to send people to buy the book. It's called Books and Crannies. It's a Black woman-owned independent bookstore in Virginia. So I'm like,
perfect.
yeah, that's a good
Yes,
option.
go to Books and Crannies. Also,
No,
go there and
TaniaIsrael.com.
yeah, TaniaIsrael.com. But Books and Crannies is the like maybe the best name I've ever heard for
I
a
know.
bookstore. I'm just send that person some money and tell them the name's really good and get a book.
And can you
So-
just recap again, like how people can find out about you and your workshop coming up so that people just have it?
Absolutely. Everything you need is on TaniaIsrael.com. But if you have trouble working your way through it, hopefully the workshop is getting posted, but it's on Eventbrite. But if you go to my website, you're going to see it. Also, you can follow me on social media. I'm BYB Dialogue for Beyond Your Bubble Dialogue on Twitter and Instagram, and I'm on Facebook. And LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn. So look for me any of those places, and you'll find info. And I try to share lots of resources because that's what I like to do. And I feel like, it can help, and we need some help healing this divide and healing our country. And I so appreciate the work that you, Asia, and Molly are doing, and just everyone who's in your community
they're doing it. They're
doing something. And that's what you need to do. We all need to do something. So thank you so much for having me here and inviting me into your community.
Thank you.
And we're gonna come to Santa Barbara when this nonsense is over. We love it there.
Yes, yes, come visit me.
Yeah. Oh my goodness.
Right.
I love Santa Barbara. Yeah. So Suze has just put the link in the comments. There's links for the articles that were mentioned in the comments. We'll continue to have the link available in the group. This will of course be pinned as a favorite interview of all time, right up there with the interview with Asia's dad, which was the first one that we ever did. Yeah. Just increasing proximity, get to know my father-in-law. So thank you so much for your time. I know you're busy. We so appreciate it. And thank you so much for your work. It's so inspiring.
Thank you so much. This has been great.
Take care. Bye-bye.